Hey fellas, welcome to the Slim MMA YouTube channel. I hope your day is going well. In today's video, I have the biggest title fights in each division. So I'm not talking about the title fight I think should be next necessarily, or what I think the most reasonable title fight is, or what I think will be the best title fight. I'm talking biggest in terms of the amount of hype that will be around that fight, and also the number of eyes that this fight will bring to an event. So before I get into it, if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel, I would greatly appreciate it. But kicking it off with flyweight, I have Joshua Van versus Alejandro Pantoja 2. The first fight had a lot of hype around it already because Van is young and he has a good fan base around him, and Pantoja was on a historic title reign. Obviously, the way the first fight ended left a sour taste in every fan's mouth. Seeing Pantoja snap his arm the way he did was bad for the Pantoja fans and even for the Van fans. I know myself wasn't particularly satisfied with Joshua Van winning the belt that way. I wanted him to go out there and actually win the belt convincingly and not have just an unlucky arm break for him to win the belt. Obviously, he did end up going celebrating on the cage, which caused a bit more tension between the fan bases. So I think this fight is one of the biggest title fights in flyweight for a very long time, maybe the biggest in flyweight history with the circumstances. The honourable mentions though, I have Joshua Van versus Tatsu Taira and Manel Cape. They're good fights. I think we might get one of those next before we see Pantoja versus Van. Hopefully Van can actually defend his belt so we get to see him fight Pantoja. But these fights won't have heaps of hype around them. They pale in comparison to the hype that Pantoja versus Van 2 will have. Moving on to bantamweight, I have Peter Yan versus Sean O'Malley 2. First fight was an absolute banger, super controversial. They're both very entertaining fighters, good strikers. I think seeing these guys do a 5-round fight for the title would just be an amazing event. I think you could easily see this fight headlining at the White House because Sean is one of the biggest US stars in the UFC right now, and Peter Yan has a massive fan base as well. But it just edges Peter Yan versus Merab 3. I think this fight will also be absolutely massive because I still think Merab is the bantamweight GOAT. He just won on a massive title reign, had a dominant win over Peter Yan in his win streak. Then Peter Yan has a dominant win over him, so they're 1-1, both with dominant wins. I think the winner of that fight would be considered the bantamweight GOAT in my opinion. And then also in the honourable mentions, I have Peter Yan versus Umar. Another very entertaining fight, and another fight I think will have a lot of hype around it because Umar had a good performance in the first fight against Merab. He won the first two rounds quite convincingly in my opinion, and he has a big fan base, being a Dagestani as well. I don't think we'll get this fight anytime soon. I think Sean O'Malley will beat Song Yadong at 324. If he doesn't, and Merab's not ready, then we may get the Umar fight, but hopefully that doesn't happen because if Sugar loses at 324, it is the end of the Sugar show. So hopefully we can see him win there and we get Yan versus Sean O'Malley 2 at the White House. I think that'd be a perfect headliner for that card. Going on to featherweight, not a heap of massive fights for this division. I have Volk versus Evloev as what I think would be the biggest fight in that division if Volk beats Diego Lopez. I'm not including that fight in this list because that's already going to happen at 325. It's already been announced. And if Diego Lopez wins, I also think the biggest fight for him would also be Evloev. And another honourable mention I have is Volk versus Murphy. Don't think there'd be a lot of hype around these fights. Evloev probably has a little bit more name value than Murphy. I feel like that he's in a massive fan base for Lerone Murphy, but they are both undefeated fighters, so seeing Volk versus them, and they are probably they're the joint number one contenders in my opinion for the division, so I think they'll be good fights. Volk is obviously carrying the hype in this division, so hopefully we can see him defend his belt at 325 and then go on and beat one of these guys, maybe even beat both of them and retire and just finish off an amazing legacy for Volk. But yeah, without Volk, I don't think there's much hype around these title fights in the featherweight division. But if Volk beats Lopez at 325, I think Evloev versus Volk. Dagestani, he was unable to beat Islam in 2 fights, so there's that storyline there for another Russia versus Australia storyline. So there will be hype around that fight because obviously there's Volk. So hopefully we get to see that in the future because it probably should be the title fight right now and not Volk versus Lopez 2. Going into the lightweight division, obviously I have Ilya versus Islam. You just don't get opportunities like this in any sport, let alone the UFC, with the two best guys being close in weight divisions where they can actually have a fight against each other. Pound for pound number 1 versus pound for pound number 2. They've interchanged that number 1 spot last year. Also, top 5 fighters of all time, with people having Islam as their GOAT as well. Just so much around this fight that would just elevate it to another stratosphere of hype, and the amount of eyes that will watch this fight to see who's pretty much the GOAT of the sport if this fight happens. So Ilya versus Islam would be generational. But realistically, you can put Ilya against anyone in that division and you're having a massive fight. So the honourable mentions of Ilya versus Paddy, huge fight with their storyline going back so far and their beef. Ilya versus Armin, beef between them as well. And then Ilya versus Holloway too at lightweight, another massive fight because their first fight was pretty competitive through the first 3. And then obviously Ilya KOs Max. But I think Max is looking more improved at lightweight, and I think it could be a very interesting fight if they ran that back for the belt at lightweight. And I think it'd be a great fight as well, super entertaining. If Paddy gets promoted to the undisputed champ, if Ilya vacates for either personal reasons or if he wants to go up to welterweight, I think Paddy versus Armin would be a pretty big fight as well. There'll be a lot of hype around that because they're beefing a lot currently in the media. They've expressed clearly that they do not like each other. So I think that would also be a big fight for the lightweight division. Moving on to welterweight, no surprise, I have Islam versus Ilya again. I think I would like to see the fight happen at 155, but if we're talking about the level of hype around the fight and the eyes it will bring, I think at welterweight it will be the biggest fight between these two, because you have Ilya going up to fight for his 3rd title in a different weight class. He's a 145er going to 170 versus a guy who's considered the GOAT by many people. Just so much hype around this fight if it happened. Such a massive storyline. Obviously, people compare Ilya to Conor McGregor and obviously Islam to Khabib. And so you get that storyline there as well. Just a generational fight and would just do wonders for the sport. I think it would really elevate it to another level. But some honourable mentions for Islam. Islam versus Gary. Got the Russia versus Ireland storyline there. Ian Gary's on a good win streak. He's a very good fighter. He can be unlikable at times, but he also can be likable at times. So I never know how to feel about Ian Gary. Sometimes I like him, sometimes I don't. But he is a good fighter, and I think there would be a lot of hype around this fight. I think he could actually get it done. And then also I have Islam versus Kamaru Usman. Kamaru Usman's obviously one of the best welterweights of all time. Had a 15-fight win streak before he got KO'd by Leon Edwards. So there would be hype around this fight, and it'd just be another massive legacy fighter for Islam to add to his resume as well if that fight happens. So I think that would also be a big fight, but obviously clear and above Islam versus Ilya with the storyline that has as the biggest fight at welterweight. Moving on to middleweight, probably the toughest division for me to find a big fight for, but so to go for Khamzat versus Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland obviously has the name value. He's a good fighter. He has a good wrestling base, so there'll be a bit of hype around that. But I think it does lose a lot of hype because though Strickland did put a good performance in the first fight against him, arguably beat DDP. DDP was able to 50-45 Strickland in their second fight. And then DDP in the following fight got 50-43 by Khamzat. So that does take a bit of the hype out of it. But I know MMA math isn't a real thing, so it won't take too much hype, but it would definitely reduce it a little bit. Some honourable mentions for Khamzat though, I have Khamzat versus Imavov. I think there would be very little hype for this fight. I think a lot of people are just going to think Khamzat will just absolutely maul him. Imavov, not the best at selling fights, doesn't speak that much English, and yeah, it just doesn't really have a character to him. He's sort of just a bit of an NPC. Also, another honourable mention, Fluffy Hernandez versus Khamzat. I think that would be a bit more hype than the Imavov fight. Fluffy has a bit of a following behind him, and he's also a great wrestler. Has a lot of takedowns, so there'd be some intrigue in if someone with good wrestling can actually delay being taken down by Khamzat and not getting taken down in the first 15 seconds. But I'm going to go Sean Strickland as the biggest fight for that division, just purely off his name value, and he's a very skillful fighter, and yeah, I think it would be a good fight. I think Khamzat probably gets it done, but I think it would be the biggest fight for that division. Going to light heavyweight, probably a bit unusual for me to not have Alex Pereira as the biggest fight for that division because he's possibly the face of the UFC, definitely one of the biggest stars they have. But I think Yuri versus Alberg would have a lot of intrigue behind it, which would elevate the hype and people would want to watch and see how that fight goes. Obviously, Yuri has a massive following. I think he's probably my favourite fighter in the UFC. And Olberg's on a great win streak as well, so I think seeing that fight would be very entertaining, and I think, yeah, it'd be a lot of hype around it. The reason I didn't go Yuri versus Pereira 3 is because Pereira was able to beat Yuri just so easily in those first 2 fights. No one else has been able to beat Yuri, but Alex Pereira is just his kryptonite and just made it look so effortless for him to just KO him, especially in that second fight. It was like, it's hard to justify a third fight against Alex. And then, obviously, Alex versus Olberg. I think there would be some hype around that fight. Olberg, as I said, is on a good win streak. Alex, biggest fighter in the UFC, I think. So there'd be hype around that. But maybe a little biased, I'm going to go Yuri versus Olberg as the biggest fighter in the light heavyweight division. Because, yeah, I think there'd be a bit of intrigue around that fight. But it does also lead on to heavyweight, where I have Tom Aspinall versus Alex Pereira for the undisputed heavyweight title. This fight would have Alex challenging to become maybe not the first triple champ if Ilya can beat him there, but a triple champ in the UFC, which is no one has ever done and no one has ever looked like doing. So a lot of hype around that. Tom Aspinall also has a lot of hype around him because his UFC career is just so cursed. He just can't get into a rhythm. He can't get title defenses going. John Jones took away a year of his career. Then he goes for his first title defense against Gane, gets eye poked, probably takes away another year of his career. So he's just a cursed fighter. So that would have a lot of hype around it. Can he defend his belt? And it would be against Alex Pereira going for his third belt, and also just one of the biggest fighters in the UFC. Some honourable mentions for the heavyweight division. I have Aspinall versus Gane. Obviously, we know how that first fight went. There wasn't much hype behind it in the first fight, but the way Gane was able to stand at range and pop the jab and actually damage Aspinall a little bit, there's definitely going to be a lot more hype for the second fight. Obviously, the way it ended with him getting eye poked. Now you get to see Bully Tom. Cyril Gane was probably winning that first fight, so now there's a few more question marks at Tom Aspinall, not just going to go out there and just dominate everyone like we all thought he was. I think in the first fight he was maybe a 4-1 favourite. I think in the next one the odds will be much closer, so there'll be a bit more hype around this fight. So I think Aspinall versus Gane 2, massive fight as well. And then also Pereira versus Gane if Aspinall can't get up soon enough. If you have to go for eye surgery or something like that, Pereira versus Gane would be also massive because, as I said before, Pereira going for his third belt. A bit more hype behind Gane now because he had a good 1 round against Tom Aspinall, which is pretty crazy. He had 1 round against Aspinall, and now he has some hype behind him. So it's good to see the heavyweight division actually has some entertaining title fights. They could make some of the biggest fights in the sport, which is good because the division's just been stagnant for 2 years now. Ever since John Jones tore his pec, basically, the division just has stopped moving. So it's good to see there's some good title fights there. So that's going to finish this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye, guys.